I'm Sarah Carter. This is a documentary that I've been wanting to do for some time. What drew me to this topic is that the United States is in the middle of an epidemic, a national health emergency. I began my career covering the Mexican drug cartels like Sinaloa and other transnational criminal organizations operating in the United States. Later, I reported on heroin and the opioid trade while I was covering the Afghanistan war. While there has been some excellent reporting on this crisis, we're losing 115 people a day.
I'm Heidi Riggs. One of those 115 people was my daughter, Marin. The first time she used heroin, she smoked it. She said it was like seeing the face of God. Marin had a very caring heart, but she also struggled within herself, self-esteem, wanting to fit in. She never thought she was beautiful enough, and so she struggled with her weight. She was athletic and she was built like an athlete, but she always wanted that skinny girl body. She was bullied and she really struggled with that. When we started her treatment, we were told that less than 50% make it. 18 months later, Marin died 2 weeks after her 20th birthday.
I'm Chris Farrell, a former Army counterintelligence officer who served as a counterespionage case officer, and for the last 20 years, I've been the Director of Investigations at Judicial Watch. A couple of years ago, I was involved in a project called the Sun City Cell, focusing on how a narco terror ring working with the Mexican cartels would move literally anything into the United States for the right amount of money, from drugs to people.
Which is a federal law for false official
I first met Heidi at a briefing I did in Columbus, Ohio.
I listened. It was gut-wrenching. It was like someone punched me in the stomach. I had no idea how big the problem was, how evil it was, and the level of corruption. That night, I went from being a sad mom to being a really pissed off mom.
You know what? I'm a pissed off mom too. We're losing a generation to this epidemic. I feel like I've gone from reporter to joining people like Heidi, people committed to stopping this epidemic that is killing kids and tearing our families apart. And I'm determined to make sure our efforts are not in vain. Part of the reason we're in Arizona, Chris, is because you were so adamant that this was an important place that isn't covered enough in the media.
You know, this is really, in Arizona, the superhighway for narcotics, drug smuggling. You know, the zone that runs basically from, let's say, Aravaca, which is a town just northwest of Nogales, all the way over to NACO, has an enormous amount of drug trafficking, smuggling going on, besides all the illegal immigration and the human trafficking.
Why do you think these drug cartels utilize this passage so much?
You know, it's a broad swath of stuff. So you've got very sophisticated criminal operations that know how to move contraband. And whether that's drugs or people, they've got a wide array of stuff.
As they're traveling through, the cartels control the smuggling routes.
Robert Arce has worked both federal and local law enforcement. He served in both the Department of Justice and the Department of State. During one of his assignments, he spent 3 years in northeast Mexico, working the international narcotics trade.
Whether it's a human smuggling or the drug trafficking, you don't cross through those routes unless you are paying to those cartels. If you're a smuggler and you're not paying and you get caught, the sentence will be death. They will kill you.
According to the Congressional Research Service, there are 9 major drug trafficking organizations called DTOs or cartels operating in Mexico. These cartels have a long history of violent battles over strategic routes and distribution points on both sides of the border.
Well, right here in Arizona, the dominant cartel is the Sinaloa cartel or Sinaloa Federation, but the Sinaloa cartel is broken up into numerous groups. There's in Phoenix, their Sinaloa cartel is operating. They have their U.S.-based groups operating out of Phoenix to include security or armed wings of the Sinaloa cartel operating within the Phoenix area, protecting the drug houses and in charge of the distribution to send out onto the rest of the United States.
According to the DEA, the Sinaloa cartel is the major supplier of heroin and opioids in the lucrative U.S. market. Even after the capture of their billionaire founder Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in 2017, the cartel continues to thrive.
Chapo Guzman was one of Forbes' wealthiest individuals in the world. The emerging threats.
Derek Maltz is the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration's Special Operations Division. He says that under Guzman's leadership, the Sinaloa cartel mastered advanced intelligence gathering techniques.
They have people in the telecommunications industry that look at the current trends in encrypted communications, how to beat the system. I mean, look at Chapo Guzman. Chapo Guzman had his own communication system set up by engineers, like really, really smart people.
We're dealing with the Sinaloa cartel. This is their territory, and obviously they're operating through here.
Marcia Armendariz is a supervisor for U.S. Customs and Border Protection in Nogales, Arizona. She says her station is under constant surveillance by cartel operatives.
We are what we call a point of disadvantage because Mexico does have the higher ground. So they're actually, we're actually exposed for them to see everything that we do here, whether it comes to what type of operations we're running and who's working, who's not working, what we're doing, what we're not doing.
I mean, they're very good at what they do. There's no doubt about that. And we don't have the manpower and even the technology, to beat them.
Patricia Kramer is the Arizona chapter president of the National Treasury Employees Union. She says the cartels are an unconventional enemy that is feeding the opioid epidemic in America.
Scary because the cartels, they have no policies, right? They don't have a headquarters that's telling them, no, you can't do this, and tying their hands.
They have no bureaucracy, right? They have no budget constraints. They have no policies. They don't have any real processes like we do in law enforcement to follow. So they're about making money, and they're going to do whatever they have to do to make money.
They have all the money in the world and all the technology and the manpower in the world to beat us. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what they're doing. They're beating us.
What you need to understand is that the distribution system for the cartels is exactly like Walmart's. Walmart never runs out of milk. The cartel never runs out of drugs. They'll use anything: trains, planes, boats, trucks, cars, and people.
How do they try to hide it from you?
We do not underestimate anybody because it could range from, an elderly person to a really young person. The youngest person we've encountered here was a 12-year-old kid. The oldest person that I've dealt with, she was 96 years old.
What was the 12-year-old strapped with?
That 12-year-old had cocaine.
Wow, and the grandmother?
The grandmother had methamphetamine and heroin.
It's to show you how the cartels have no limits. Seeing kids with drugs in their diapers, in the car seats, in their strollers. I mean, that's almost nice compared to other ways that they have used children.
When I was out in the field doing interviews, I was reminded of one thing. The cartels don't respect any living thing. They just don't care.
They don't care because the cartels are interested in making billions of dollars. And in order to make that money, they have to control the points of access into the United States across the entire southwestern border.
If you go to Tijuana, San Diego, California area, over there you have the remnants of the Tijuana cartel is now associated and working with the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. And they're moving drugs. And right now in Tijuana, because you have a war going on, many cartel hits, they're breaking records in Tijuana right now.
In the month of May, it's a record-breaking, the most murders in the history of Mexico, May of 2018. Last year, 29,000 people were killed in Mexico. The violence is escalating through the roof.
It escalates to the point where you have spillover violence. Where the drugs go, the violence follows. Jim Chilton is a rancher who has ties to southern Arizona that go back to the 1890s. The cartels move people and drugs across his land all the time.
You actually had a Border Patrol agent targeted by the drug cartels on your property.
Well, first, we felt really sad for the Border Patrol agent and his family. Second, it's an everyday risk we all run of getting shot. I've run into situations where you have guys with AK-47s. I carry on my saddle a pistol and a rifle, and if I see a bunch, I go the other way, try to avoid conflict. And the Sinaloa cartel scouts on our mountains, we are hoping and believe they're guiding their drug packers around us,
Just
or
to
that
avoid
way
each
to
other.
avoid each other, yes.
After speaking with Mr. Chilton, I was thinking, he was talking about avoiding, not stopping. He was literally surrendering his property line in order to survive.
If we don't stop the tidal wave of drugs coming into our country, the border, at one point we used to look at the border with Mexico and Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, California. The border has moved so much further to the north, we don't even know where the border is at anymore.
You have this poison being dumped in our country and our communities are suffering. Kids are dropping dead every day of the week. Parents of good kids are going up to their bedrooms, finding their kids passed out dead. I mean, this is a crisis that we've never seen before. So we need a greater sense of urgency.
To fight this epidemic, we have to control our southern border. To some people, that's political. Okay, fine. But here are the facts as reported by multiple government agencies and news organizations. Most of the heroin coming into the United States is cultivated on poppy fields in Mexico, with Mexican drug cartels controlling the production and distribution, feeding it into the United States.
The DEA calls the Mexican drug cartels the greatest threat to the United States. And that threat has intensified because of fentanyl, a drug that is killing our children and can literally be used as a weapon of mass destruction.
Well, now all hard narcotics, we treat them as if they are laced with fentanyl.
Simply touching the dangerous new street drug fentanyl caused an Ohio police officer to overdose, and he had to be rushed to the hospital.
It happened while the officer was confiscating the drug during an arrest in East Liverpool near the Ohio-Pennsylvania state line.
Back at the station, Officer Chris Green noticed the powder on one of their shirts and went to brush it off. He OD'd on the fentanyl an hour later.
It's easy to smuggle because it's compact. So that's why a lot of the groups are going over to that.
It is one of the biggest seizures of an opioid drug in U.S. history.
A state trooper noticed a Freightliner truck and semi-trailer driving on the shoulder near Kearney last Thursday. Look at this.
The search of the truck and trailer revealed 118 pounds of drugs hidden in a concealed compartment inside the trailer.
According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, that is potentially enough to kill 26 million people.
It is a public health hazard of the highest degree.
The case in Nebraska, the Nebraska Highway Patrol pulled over a tractor trailer, 118 pounds of fentanyl, okay? According to the experts, that could kill 26 million people. You use salt and pepper, right? 4 grains of salt is equivalent to like 2 milligrams of fentanyl. So think about how small 2 milligrams, 4 grains of salt is. That's all you need to kill an adult.
So if it only takes 2 milligrams of fentanyl to kill a person, that's worse than anthrax.
Hey, wake up, bud. Wake up, man.
To understand how we got to this point, you need to understand the evolution from heroin to heroin laced with synthetics.
When you look at heroin trafficking, right? Back in the early 90s, when the Colombians started producing white heroin, they were producing it to make money, and they used their existing distribution networks of Dominicans and Puerto Rican drug traffickers in New York and Boston on the East Coast to put this heroin on the streets. And they did it for a purpose, to actually build a base of customers, to make money. They were selling heroin in little glassine bags for $10 a bag, but inside those bags was like 80 or 90% heroin. So people were getting addicted for life.
When pain treatment is successful, it stays successful.
In the early 90s, Purdue Pharma began testing the painkiller OxyContin. It was during that period that the number of painkiller prescriptions filled at U.S. pharmacies started increasing nearly 3 million per year, and by the mid-90s, that number reached more than 8 million. As the prices rose, people could no longer afford the prescription drugs.
So they had to go to a less expensive alternative, which was heroin. But unfortunately, the Mexican cartels have figured out a way to really profit by bringing in synthetic opioids from China that's already made.
And the synthetic opioid of choice is fentanyl. According to the DEA, a kilo of fentanyl costs between $3,000 and $4,000. After breaking it down into dosages, the potential profit on a kilo can exceed $1 million.
You get a shipment into Mexico, and all of a sudden you can make $1 million, $1.5 million on 1 kilogram. So from a business standpoint, this is what they realized, like this is a golden opportunity.
Sources had told us at one time that they were not happy with methamphetamine because methamphetamine was making their customers crazy, and after a while they were dying. Now with the fentanyl, because they're making so much of a return, one of my sources had told me, well, if they die, we made enough money off of them, we're okay with it.
Hey, grab Narcan too, just in case.
The Center for Disease Control calls fentanyl the most prevalent and the most significant synthetic opioid threat to the United States.
When you hear the word fentanyl, what comes to mind?
Death.
Daniel Baker is the chief toxicologist for the Franklin County Coroner's Office in Columbus, Ohio.
As long as fentanyl use continues, that drug overdoses will continue and deaths will continue.
Years back, fentanyl to me used to mean pre-anesthesia, anesthesia, pain management, but these days when you say the word fentanyl, you hear overdoses, deaths.
Dr. Anahi Ortiz is the Franklin County coroner.
Sometimes it's overwhelming to hear that there's several that day that were 25, 22, 23, and died of an overdose.
What were the age ranges of the victims?
We actually had a little bit more than 50% of those who died in 2017 were under 39 years of age. I'm going to say that this year, in 2018, it's even younger, way younger than that, because we're seeing a lot of 20-something-year-olds.
Over the last several buys we have done with oxycodone, which is a Percocet, the pills have been coming from Detroit, according to the purchasee. And after getting those pills back, sending them off to be tested, they've come back to be tested as heroin or heroin and fentanyl mixture. What's frightening is, I would say 40 to 50% of all the pills purchased from our task force on the street are coming back to contain heroin and fentanyl mixture now. And they're not what they were supposed to be.
This undercover narcotics detective, whose identity we agreed to conceal, works on an opioid task force in Ohio. I have to ask the question, sounds so crazy, but it's so dangerous. What would it take to weaponize fentanyl, or if you had an accidental release of fentanyl, just maybe in a stop, with officers?
That's an interesting question. When you're speaking of weaponizing any type of drug, I don't think you want to hear fentanyl or carfentanil in that discussion. My main concern would be the initial release of a large amount of a synthetic into the atmosphere, and then after that, devastation would be who the hell's going to clean up all the synthetics that's still in the environment.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
The DEA threat assessment last year, they identified Central Ohio and Dayton as hubs for the Mexican drug cartel. Is this true?
It is true. We do have a presence of cartel in Columbus area.
So basically we have foreign narcotics organizations dividing up the U.S. to sell their drugs.
Oh, sure, yes.
How crazy is that to you when you think about that as an officer?
Oh, back years ago it would have been crazy, but after seeing it and working around it and working closely with the DEA on some of the cases, it's common practice anymore. It's just, we see it, it's there, you can't unsee it.
How did this happen? Why was this allowed to happen? How did it get to this point?
In my opinion, when you're talking about anything that's worth multi-billions of dollars, anything's possible.
So there is a case where we discovered that there was a strong nexus with the cartels in Columbus, where drugs were being moved from Columbus to the Northern Virginia area.
This undercover detective is based in Northern Virginia. He agreed to speak with me as long as we concealed his identity. His work focuses primarily on gang operations. Gangs such as MS-13 are the main distributors of street drugs. He says that shutting down the supply chains is a major battle because of how they are structured.
What we're dealing with is that a lot of these gangs and cartels are decentralized. And by that I mean there's no central hub where everything's collected, and then from there it's parted off to whatever destination it's destined to go. Rather, we have hubs across the nation, and as soon as those drugs get across the border, they're immediately sent there. And then from there, it's distributed amongst the gangs for them to deal and sell to their customers.
So we have these hubs all across the nation. Now I'm seeing the scale of this crisis. So rather than look at the country as a whole, I asked the detective to take a step back and walk me through the distribution on a local level. He said the first step is to understand gangs and how members get into the United States.
They go out to the Border Patrol and then they basically say, this and that, but then also take it to the next level where you may have an adult who's associated with the gang, and they'll say, hey, cut your hair, shave, cross the border, and when you cross the border, you're 17. And then we'll take you, and then that person who's 23, 25, or 30 years old is now placed in a high school. And now he's in charge of recruiting girls and other males into the gang.
We hear a lot about MS-13, but just like there are multiple Mexican drug cartels controlling the supply, there are networks of gangs handling the street-level distribution.
So we deal with a litany of different kind of gangs. We have our national gangs, which can be described as your Latin Kings, Bloods, Crips, Gangster Disciples. And then you have something that's called our neighborhood gangs, We saw these hybrid gangs that kind of prop up in the local neighborhoods. And then finally we have something that's called transnational gangs. This is primarily in reference to MS-13 and 18th Street. Now, when it comes to the associates who are associated with these gangs, we're dealing with any type of person that's described as a young juvenile to adults. And the goal for each individual who's a low-ranking or low-status associate with MS is to eventually become a homeboy.
And how do you do that? What do they need to do?
Depending on the clique, that could be committing murders. Now, depending on the clique, it could be committing 1 murder, 2 murders, or 3 murders.
What are those murders like? Because we've heard stories.
Essentially, they're brutal murders. They're using bladed weapons, machetes, knives, and essentially, it's a group of people chopping an individual up.
And you found that here in the United States?
Yes.
I mean, you look at MS-13. What's their motto? Rape, kill, and control, right? And these guys, I mean, they are taking machetes and chopping kids apart. I mean, look at Long Island, that's my hometown. 25 people have been killed over the last 2 years from MS-13.
Earlier we talked about spillover violence. It starts at the border and heads north. Follow the drugs and you'll find the violence.
Chicago is a prime example. The violence that's going on in Chicago is driven by these cartels from primarily down south of our border, the Mexican cartels, and they are utilizing street gang members to move their product.
Our gang, our MS, they're in Baltimore, they're in Boston, they're in New York, Miami, they're in Ohio. So whatever ties they may have with one another, whatever business agreements, that's how they transfer drugs from point A to point B.
You described to me at one point, you said it's terrorism. They operate like terrorists.
They are terrorists, and I'm referring to MS. The way they operate, the way they do what they do, they're able to control a whole neighborhood hostage. And by that, I mean, kids can go to certain places, moms and their families are hurrying from the store to the apartments because they're afraid to be outside.
Any major inner city that you're at where there's violence, or even now that it's reaching small town America, it's wherever there's a street market set up, there's always going to be a dominant group and there's going to be a group challenging them. So not only do you have the drug overdoses, the damage that is being done tearing families apart, but also the violence. And with the violence, you have young street gang members trying to prove a name for themselves, and they're willing to back up their gang and use violence to enforce and to promote that gang that they're working for.
We have to understand that when it comes to things like the drug distribution, a lot of these drugs come from the gangs. So to say that, oh, this isn't going to affect me, but then if you have someone from a different community that buy heroin or meth, there's a very good chance that those drugs came from either the cartels or the gangs.
Would you describe some of the people as monsters, or you described it as terrorist acts?
I think it's evil, and I'm not being over dramatic, it's just evil.
Heroin is evil. It took my daughter.
My name is Ashley Evans, and yes, heroin is evil.
I'm Pastor Johnny Amos. I have begun to speak about this evil to my church family.
We are in a war for the souls of men.
I told them Sunday in my message that you may not know anybody on heroin, but just keep living, that this is going to hit our doorstep one day, because this is out there and it's affecting our youth, it's affecting, even my son.
Well, I started using at a young age. I had some trauma happen. From 7 to 14, I was molested by a cousin, and then 14, I had started using drugs to kind of cope with that a little bit.
I have been here for 4 years, and I ran into more heroin addicts in the last 4 years than I have, period. It's like a rebirth of heroin out there.
I had cleaned her room out and found needles in the register and inside her pillowcase, and in the same time, I'm kind of like in denial, like this is knowing it's happening, but you just don't want to believe that maybe how could she even put a needle in her arm?
When I got off the pain meds, I found heroin. It was the best feeling I had ever felt in my life. It took every bit of emotional pain away.
She said it was like seeing the face of God. She said, Mom, it was just an experience I can't explain.
Where our church is located here, it has great demographics. We have wealthy people, and we have people that are poor on welfare, food stamps, Section 8, trying to survive. A lot of times people take drugs to relieve pain, stress, or to chill out, whatever they want to call it.
I call it the devil. It's the one drug that I couldn't control myself with.
I have pastor friends here in Columbus done like 4 or 5 funerals for perfectly looking, healthy people that overdose on heroin. It hurts us, it's hurting our community.
Every time I used, I felt guilty, but I couldn't stop. It was stronger than I was. And mine's really when I was pregnant with her, that's the worst thing I've ever done. Because I couldn't think, how could I be pregnant with this little girl knowing that she is gonna be addicted to drugs and do it anyways?
Maybe a mother's intuition, I immediately knew. I said, Marin relapsed, and he said yes. And then I went, is she okay? And he said, the paramedics are with her. We're probably gonna have to go to the hospital. So when he pulled in, it seemed like it took him forever, and the apartment was only 10 minutes from this house. And he said, I have to tell you something. He said, Marin is gone. And I said, what do you mean she's gone? He said, Heidi, she's dead. And I can't explain the pain, and it was like my gut had been torn out of me, and I said, I have to get to her.
We're being destroyed from within. It's like internal destruction that's happening with our young people, the suburban white girls, happening to the inner city. Well, guys, we're here tonight, and we're going to go in the name of the Lord, and the Lord is going to allow us to encounter some people who are waiting on us. There's people out there desperately waiting on us tonight, so we're going to go in the name of the Lord. And we are a group of pastors from the suburban area all the way down to the, to the inner city, rural area, and we come together, amen, to look at how we can help our city, transform our city, and work together, spread this information, and that they can be preaching it in their pulpit, I can be preaching in our pulpit, to bring an awareness. The church needs to take her place again as leadership, as a lead role in our communities and our crisis in our communities.
There's a program in Indianapolis that's much like the program that you have here in Ohio. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's the 10-Point Indianapolis Coalition, led by Reverend Harrison. They have transformed one of the worst areas in Indianapolis. And so we are modeling what we do here in Columbus off of that. It takes building relationships with the police, with the businesses, building relationship with the gang members, building relationship with the drug dealers, and working together to reduce crime, violent crime, shootings. Yeah, we're just trying to bring hope and awareness to our community.
As a parent, I'm terrified, thinking like, you can't be with your child 24 hours a day, and you want to protect them, from the worst.
I believe the solution, the answer, is that the church must stand up and get connected with with our people, and be a voice for them as a community, as a village, as a neighborhood. So I'm saying that there's hope for this. We are making a difference. And so that's what motivates me to go out into the streets, to tell people, to share this information I have, to pray for people, to believe God. Amen. The spiritual part of our brain, I believe, is stronger than the natural part of our brain.
Everything that you've done that you've screwed up is awesome, because that's all going to be used to give hope to the next guy. I believe healing the brain is a process. My name is Tom Thompson, founder of The Refuge over 20 years ago. The medical option and treatment is one of those paths. We at The Refuge are a faith-based, long-term model that heals the body, soul, and the mind. At The Refuge, we focus on relationships, and as the men and women coming through our ministry long-term and they're being healed, they have restoration of families, restoration of children, parents, and then it's actually a practical side that they take what they've been given, find their gifts and talents, and they enter the marketplace. And they go out in the business community, and that really brings value and worth to who they are. The night that I heard Chris Farrell, it was an eye-opening experience for me. The Refuge has been focused on the last piece of the process, which I consider now triage after everything else has been done. Our nation at that night was just explained to us as at risk. And as I heard that, that truly does. We have to break this epidemic before it grips generations to come. In some ways, it already has. The foster care system is being overrun, and the children, because of the overdoses of their parents, are very much at risk that they will become the overdose parents in the next generation.
Unless this epidemic is stopped, the United States will change, maybe forever. Jill Kingston is the executive director of Bridget's Path, a facility in Dayton, Ohio that offers support for drug-exposed newborns and their mothers.
There is definitely a generational problem when a child's been through trauma. So whether they've been through trauma through the foster care system or through their own lives because their parents battled addiction themselves, you see it resurface and you're dealing with the same problem again. You see that a lot.
My mom had suffered from an overdose when she passed away. Then I also was going through some abuse in a relationship, so it was like trickling down.
And that trickling down continues through society as the collateral damage of this epidemic spreads.
The stigma that we have to overcome is that, these are babies, these are the innocent victims, and so people are very sad when they see what the babies are going through. And so they instantly look at that mom and say, how could you do this to this baby? What they don't realize is that mama is going, what have I done to my baby? And she's dealing with everything that she's going through.
Hey, wake up, bud. Wake up, man.
Kids are dying. It's as simple as that. Kids are dying, we're dealing with it, and I think we don't pay too much attention to it, and that's because we don't like to accept it, because it's ugly.
It transcends anything you can imagine, from socioeconomical age, race, religion. It doesn't matter what it is. It's available to anybody at any time.
The frustration is that for 3.5, 4 years, I've worked at the local level, the state level, the federal level, and talked to a lot of people that I thought were on the same page about directly helping these moms, and we're not any further than we were 4 years ago.
We have lost, in a way, our community, our village. We used to say it takes a parent to birth a child, but it takes a village to raise a child. And so our thing is to rebirth the village, community, awareness. Let's watch out for each other. Let's pray for each other. Let's come together and believe for each other.
Yeah, there is a way to fight it, and the way to fight it is you can't think of it as in a whole. It's not a war you're going to win, because it's just not. Each law enforcement agency has to pick and choose their own battles within their own community, and like I said, if you can help that one or 2 or 3 people change somebody's life, that ultimately changes your life also.
If you communicate with your kids and you don't be afraid to be very realistic of what's going on in the world, show them the news, pull up stories on the internet. That's what I do with my kids.
The hard part right now is Mexico has to cooperate, other countries have to cooperate, and we're being attacked by other countries that they're sending this, whether it's Mexico or some country, if it's China, it's coming from Asia, it's coming into the US. It's like we're under attack, is what it is.
I mean, does there anything keep you up at night?
I have a 30-year-old daughter and two 25-year-old twins. And that's what keeps me up at night. And I'm gonna cry in a minute. Because, you know, it's, oh gosh. I can't get into personal because if, you know, I don't want them to see it, but I don't know. You know, could that be my children? And what would happen, you know, if it was? And that's what keeps me up at night, really.
Here's my solution. A one-sentence order to the Department of Defense. Secure the southern border of the United States. Declare the cartels to be foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs. They're currently designated as foreign transnational criminal organizations, and that just isn't cutting it. When they're declared to be what they are, terrorist organizations, you give the Mexican government a choice. They can cooperate and get on board and help us to fight them as what they are, terrorist organizations, or we can do it ourselves. But making those designations would change the playing field dramatically.
This epidemic is killing our nation, our communities, and our kids. We have to end this crisis now and ensure that our efforts are not in vain.